This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, on the same day that the annual session of the legislature ended in Baton Rouge, the renovated aquarium in New Orleans opened. The inhabitants of both are closely watched from the outside. There were two major development stories in the news: a New York-based development company making a big investment in Jefferson Parish, and economic activity along Lower St. Charles Avenue. For the state's shrimping industry, the news is less promising in the face of growing out-of-state competition. All of this, plus the latest in politics, are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate; Greg LaRose, editor, the Louisiana Illuminator; and Roby Chavez, communities reporter, PBS NewsHour. We're going to go over to Greg first because the legislature ended its session in a sort of chaotic fashion, and nobody's quite sure what's in the budget.
Yeah, I think it'd be hard-pressed to go to Baton Rouge and get somebody to give you final numbers. What ended up being crunched at the last minute was to get in who gets what in terms of the $2.2 billion in state surplus. Well, they didn't actually put all of that money in there, but at the tail end, just minutes before the budget had to be passed at 6 p.m. Thursday, they cut $100 million from the Louisiana Department of Health Care. And other than maybe the 6 people in that conference committee, no one had an idea that was coming, not the governor, not the Department of Health. And a lot of upset lawmakers were really upset about that.
I know. I heard a lot of head scratching from what I read. And what exactly does that mean? What is being cut?
Well, that's the key question today. No one really knows. At the end of the day, it's probably going to be closer to like $78 million cut, because you're going to pull out about $22 million for folks on Medicaid who are being pulled off the rolls that were just only on it during the pandemic and now no longer qualify. Some of the likely targets could be home health care services for the elderly, hospitals, but I don't necessarily know that it's a done deal yet. The Joint Budget Committee will meet, and I would assume they have to meet before the beginning of the budget year on July 1st. Mm-hmm. They could restore some of that money, but that will mean likely that Governor Edwards goes in with his veto pen and takes out some pet projects. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being from those lawmakers who snuck in that last second cut on the $100 million from healthcare.
And there was also some opposition, to raising the budget cap. They opposed the governor on that because the governor wanted to see those extra monies spent right now in various things. So did he kind of get his way? He
got it mostly. I think both sides are sort of saying it's a win for everyone because no one is completely 100% happy. I think, really wasn't waving a huge victory flag by any means during his post-session press conference, but he pointed to areas where, higher education, for example, I think comes away a pretty significant winner with faculty raises. A lot of money from the surplus for one-time projects will go towards infrastructure, college campus building, some hospital funding as well. So I think they're all trumpeting that. One area that I think, it's kind of hard to say anybody got a win was in the pay raise for the teachers. While they did increase it $2,000 a year, because they pulled it out of the formula for funding schools, it's not set in stone. So it basically amounts to a stipend for next year, and it'll be up to legislators and the governor next year to figure out, do they make that permanent?
What about early childhood ed?
Early childhood ed really took a hit. They are about 75% lower, down from $200 million a year ago to, I want to say, in the neighborhood of $44 million this year. So that's going to be a real pinch, not nearly what the governor was hoping for in that regard. Although he had only pledged $50 million. His own budget had only pledged toward early childhood education just north of $50 million.
All right, so what did get through? Some controversial bills.
Yeah, the culture war bills, as we've called them, the anti-LGBTQ plus measures that involve Don't Say Gay, the names and pronouns bill, and a ban on gender-affirming health care. The governor has said he would...
For minors.
For minors,
Yeah.
thank you. He will veto those three. One that I don't necessarily think people were paying attention to is a bill that would try all 17-year-olds accused of violent crime as adults, and that reverses a change made back in 2017 where they raised the age. Now for violent crimes at least it's lowered. That to me would seem to pave the way in future years. Sheriffs are going to want more money to outfit their jails to sequester the juveniles away from the adults, because by U.S. Constitution specifics, you have to keep them separate.
So that did make it through.
It did, yeah.
Lowering for violent crimes, lowering the age to 17 to be charged as an adult. Is the governor going to go with that, do you think?
I'm asked that question. I'm waiting for an answer. And they didn't have an answer yesterday, but that bill had just been passed, and typically he's not one that jumps out until he's seen the bill to come on board.
And then also parental consent for minors for online access.
Yeah, that was a big push from Lori Schlegel in Metairie, who is a sex addiction counselor when she's not a legislator. And she has pushed hard in this, and it really puts teeth in a bill that actually made age verification a requirement. This year's bill puts the teeth in it, and I think they pulled away enforcement from the Attorney General on that. So I guess that would be the big question now. How do you actually enforce this?
So we anticipate the governor vetoing some of these pieces. What about overriding veto? Do you think that will be called?
Depends on who you talk to. If you look at a lot of those bills, including some of the anti-LGBTQ plus bills, it met that threshold of 70 votes that would be needed to override a veto. I think everyone's sort of in decompression mode, and the Constitution basically automatically sets a veto session 40 days after sine die, and then it will take just one house to say, yeah, we want to have, one chamber to say, yes, we're going to have it. So we'll wait and see if there's enough of an appetite for it to happen in mid-July.
Okay, and we're still going to wait and see what really happened
Exactly.
in terms of the budget. Okay, all right, Greg, thanks a lot. Stephanie, over to you. News of a significant development in Jefferson Parish.
Well, it was really an interesting development, I thought. I don't know how significant it is in terms of its size, but the File organization, which owns Lakeside Shopping Center and just a boodle of real estate in Metairie, that I think a lot of people aren't even aware of how big they are, is getting ready to build a 12,000 square foot retail strip center right there on North Causeway in Melville Dewey, which is just a couple of blocks north of Lakeside as you're traveling towards the Causeway. And this comes on the heels of another freestanding retail building that they built right across the street from Lakeside at Causeway and 17th. That's about getting ready to open, and that'll be an urgent care facility on top of millions and millions of more that they have invested over the past year in their office buildings, which notably include all three Lakeway Towers and the Galleria, and two or three others that I can't think of offhand. Plus, they own the land under Heritage Plaza, which is the big building right there at the 17th Street Canal. They own a lot of real estate, and they also own the land where it was announced just last week that the Trader Joe's on Tulane Avenue is coming. So this is a Manhattan company that over a decade ago was estimated to be worth $7 billion. Maybe, what is it, 4 times that much now. It's a fascinating company, and it started back in the late 60s when Jeffrey File, who is now in his late 70s, and his father acquired Lakeside out of bankruptcy, and it was an open-air shopping center since then, and they built it into the premier regional mall in the state, really. What's interesting, I think, is that their level of investment in Metairie really speaks to their, not only to their commitment to the market, but to the faith that they have in the market. I mean, Metairie is like Metairie/New Orleans, but most of their holdings are in Metairie, is their second largest market in their portfolio outside of Manhattan, where they own some really big, fancy office buildings.
So they
believe that this is the future, and I think it speaks to where really savvy investors see the future of growth in this area. You know, commercial growth, office building growth, retail growth in Metairie.
You talk to a lot of developers in what you're doing. What are people who are in the business of developing office buildings, are they cautious about what's going on now?
I think they're really starting to get cautious. I mean, you're seeing people in New Orleans coming back just because We don't have a lot of tech companies where they work remotely. We have law firms or insurance companies. They do tend to come back more. But I think, I mean, this is my prediction. I think that downtown office market is just about to crater. I really, really do. I just think nobody has said that yet. So, you know, call me wrong in a few months. But just with the insurance costs, which are going through the roof to insure some of these buildings, you go walk around some of these buildings, which I do, and they're just empty. And so even if on paper somebody has a long-term lease, and so they're still renting the space on paper, as soon as those leases are up, I just don't think they're going to be re-upping in those numbers. And I think like that's why File sees the office space is a little bit cheaper in Metairie. People feel safer, and it is easier, especially for office workers who work in the suburbs or who live in the suburbs, and there's parking.
Right,
You
or the
know?
North Shore also. So this new development by the
Yes.
organization, what's going to be in it?
Well, that's what's interesting about it. It's not rented yet, but they have said once they secure one anchor tenant, about 40% occupied, then they'll build out the rest. So it'll probably be a service/retail, not necessarily like an apparel store like we might have had in the old days, or a dress shop, because you just don't see people building that kind of retail on spec anymore. But you know, medical office buildings, I mean, they're going up everywhere, or some sort of commercial/retail. And I think they're very bullish on Metairie, which is encouraging for people in Jefferson Parish.
It definitely is. It's very encouraging. It's good to see. But this new development, it's not going to be a high-rise.
It's going to be a strip center,
okay.
12,000 square feet on a vacant lot that you can see when you go down Causeway at Melville Dewey.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. All righty, guys. Where are we going to now? The aquarium. The aquarium. We're going to go over to you and Stephanie. I know you have some things to say about it too. So it's been renovated and it's open.
It is. It opened this past week. It combines the Insectarium with the aquarium. I mean, you know, previously the Insectarium was across the street. It makes a lot more sense just to have them both in the same building. It was very impressive to me. You know, there's some people who raise some questions, and some people who say, "Well, I remember this 40 years ago. It's not the same." I don't remember it 40 years ago myself, but anyway. But it does have big fish and sharks. And I know one thing they're proud of is the Gulf of Mexico exhibit, where you can look down at the Gulf of Mexico, but you can go and you can look across at the Gulf of Mexico. And so it's very impressive. But the myth, Stephanie commented, because she's been following it. But one thought I had is that I know Ron Foreman has been boasting this is another step in riverfront development. You know, if you look in the last couple of years where you have the Four Seasons, and I think they want to do more expansion to Oldenburg Park. We have a super riverfront, but for most of the city's history, it's been blocked by things, and gradually we're opening things. But I think he seems this is it's a big catalyst. But Stephanie, what do you hear?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a big catalyst in terms of trying to really jumpstart an organization that, let's face it, it's strong, it's got a lot of money, but it was hit really, really hard by the pandemic. They had to lay off virtually their entire workforce, and they've only gradually been staffing back up. They're still only up to about 50% of where they were before. Part of that's because the Insectarium never reopened after the pandemic. It used to be on Canal Street in the old Customs House building. It never reopened after the pandemic. The aquarium had reopened, but not as many hours a day and as many days of the week as originally. And then it was closed for 6 months during this renovation. So this is going to be really great for their employees. They're also hoping it'll really bring revenues back up to where they were in 2019. And I don't remember the numbers offhand, I apologize, but the projections are that by the end of this year, they'll be up to 80% of where they were pre-pandemic, and by the end of 2024, they will surpass where they were in 2019.
And doing this without an IMAX theater. Remember when it originally opened, it didn't have an IMAX theater, and the feeling was, well, we need this so we can be opening something new fairly often, fairly frequent. So an IMAX was to that. Apparently, it really didn't work out that way over the long run.
Well, I think it was good. I mean, it was the big thing. IMAXs were the thing. And that was in 1995 when they opened the IMAX, right? So now 30 years later, everybody, all the movie theaters basically have IMAXs if you go to the mall.
In their houses, they have big
and in their houses, they got
Streaming at
72-inch
home.
TVs. So an IMAX isn't as big a deal. So they wisely, I think, reconfigured the space. They moved the Insectarium into the former IMAX space. I think that's probably where the bulk of that $41 million went, was in rebuilding that. And they've got this beautiful new glass facade, sort of a pyramid-looking thing. And then they have a butterfly garden that overlooks the river.
So the
and
butterfly
very
garden garden is back. I know that's
The
a big
butterfly
question.
garden is back. Yes,
Okay.
the butterfly garden was wonderful, and they also have an aviary with some live birds and a sloth, and yeah, they did
Yeah,
a
my
lovely
daughter
job.
was upset to hear Parakeet Point was gone, but when she heard a sloth was coming in,
Sloth
she's
is
checking it
coming,
out.
yes.
I'm going to get a review.
Yes.
Okay,
And
so
even
both.
if you don't look at the birds and the bugs, the view of the river is beautiful.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
just a great view. So just to see that.
And with that kicks off the renovation of Waldenberg Park, which I think looks great, but there's a lot more they can do to make it more pedestrian friendly, to improve the lighting, and that leads into further riverfront development, which Errol referred to.
Right, so a big attraction right there on the riverfront. So when you're going to now the aquarium and the Insectarium, you go into one central entrance, right? And you
One
go
central entrance,
one
and
way
one's to the right and one's to the left, but you have to pay for them separately. I mean, you
that's what
can
I
pay
asked.
for them together, but one admission price,
Okay, for
it's a
each one.
double, correct.
Okay, doke. All right, well, but it's still something, and it's open now, so take
It's
those
open
kids there.
now to the public as
Yeah.
of Thursday, yes.
All right, very good. All right, we're talking about sea life a bit, but a little bit different now. Robbie, I've gone over to you because you want to talk about the shrimping industry. And they really, I mean, the shrimpers over the years have always been complaining, we just don't get enough money for our hard work and for what we haul in. But they really are having a rough time right now. You did a piece on that.
Yeah, it's been tough for the shrimpers this year and the last couple of years. And so that's why this year when the brown shrimp season opened in May, instead of being out there on the waters off the coast of Louisiana, they were on the state capitol steps rallying, hoping lawmakers can give them some help for the industry that they say is at a breaking point and reaching crisis levels. The big problem that is impacting them more these days is the flood of shrimp foreign imports, and they would like more done. And keep in mind, there's a number of factors that are kind of hitting them really hard. Inflation, the high price of gas prices, the back-to-back hurricanes that decimated a lot of the infrastructure there. Of course, many still recovering from the BP oil spill. One thing I will say is that the shrimpers in this fight against imports seem to be more united than we've seen in the past. They used to point fingers at each other between the dock owners and the processing facilities and the shrimpers, but now they're pretty united and they want something done about these imports.
Because the imports are really hurting them, hurting the prices that they can get. And what about the catch? What is the catch looking like?
Yeah,
these
so when
days?
you go out and you visit the docks, what you hear from shrimpers is we're dying here. We can't afford to go out without going in the hole. And they'll tell you stories of, in the past when things were good, they'd go out for days on end, 24 hours a day, and they'd pull in a lot of shrimp. Now, one shrimper I spoke with, he used to catch about 1,500 pounds of shrimp every time he would go out. He's now catching about 500 pounds. The prices used to be about $2 a pound at the dock back in 1980, and now they're barely getting about 50 cents a pound. We've talked with processors who say, what they're sending out to the rest of the country is also dramatically down. Dean Blanchard, who has one of the centers down there, he used to make $40 million or sell $40 million of product. He's only selling about $12 million. And it's not just about the money, right? So it's about the culture. It's about the generations that grew up on the shrimp boats, and we're just not seeing the young people jump on the boat like they used to.
And that's near and dear to you because you grew up in that part of the country.
I did. My first job was at Collie Cablevision in Golden Meadow, and I would love it during shrimp season when all the boats would come in, they'd blare their horns, it'd be like a big parade. Everyone would come running to the bayou side to help unload the boats, and that just doesn't happen anymore. It's just very, very quiet.
And aren't those shrimp boats, it's not like that they get it from some big company. A lot of these shrimpers, that it's a big investor that the shrimper goes out and buys the boat.
Right. These are individual small businesses, and they don't get the help that farmers do when they're faced with different market conditions. And so many of them still haven't recovered from the hurricane because their boats flipped over. And so it really has kind of just been a culmination of cost for them that they've
And
not
it's
been
not
able to recover.
generational so much anymore. A lot of the younger folks are saying, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, it's not worth it. They're not getting paid enough, and so they're moving out. Yeah. And we've talked to shrimpers. It's been in their family 3, 4, 5 generations, and they're just literally saying we're dying. It's not going to happen.
So what about on the food end and the restaurant end? I mean, are they buying these imported shrimp from?
Yeah, so that's that's the big thing shrimpers always say. It's like, how come we can get such a small price at the dock, but we see it selling in the market for so high? Those prices have not changed, but I think what has happened with the shrimpers is that this flood of imports is kind of taking more of their market share and controlling the prices.
The shrimpers who were at the Capitol that day you mentioned also brought up the health concerns tied to the foreign source shrimp.
Right.
And they are pushing lawmakers and regulators at the federal level even to test more of it because it has some things that are really, really bad for you. Plus, they want the health department in the state to start enforcing the rule that requires restaurants and grocers to label the shrimp that they sell.
Yeah,
as imported.
shrimpers call it tainted shrimp. Government records show only about 2% of the imported shrimp is tested. Of that, 12% comes back with some sort of chemicals, antibiotics, just a lot of things that are unhealthy for you. So they're asking for just more testing to happen as well.
So are restaurants labeling? Are we finding that the restaurants are labeling?
Look,
that
what
it's foreign
shrimpers say
shrimp?
is there's just no teeth in that law. The restaurants are willing to just pay a really small fine. There's not a whole lot of enforcement. And in the enforcement that happens, it's mostly just kind of a slap on the wrist.
The health department lets the restaurants and grocers fix the problem before they're fined, and there really aren't any fines being levied.
Well, bottom line, though, there's nothing like Louisiana shrimp.
That's right, that's right.
That's just, if you want the best, go get the Louisiana shrimp. Okay, thanks a lot, Robbie, and you
Absolutely.
too, Greg, on that. Okay, Steph, over to you. St. Charles Avenue, Lower St. Charles. We're seeing a lot of
We're
development
actually
over there.
seeing some activity there, and that's another positive story and somewhat surprising because if you were driving down Lower St. Charles, I mean, last year, even the year before, you'd be looking around and saying, oh my gosh, this is our premier avenue and it looks terrible. And lately, a lot of those buildings, which actually had probably been acquired in 2021, but things got delayed, are now starting to come back online, be repurposed, be renovated. So like between the 1100 block and the 1600 block, there are just millions of dollars in new investments. One of the most exciting blocks is in the 1300 block where Baptist Community Ministries, which is really a fabulous foundation and community stakeholder, is investing $20 million renovating an old bank building that they bought a couple of years ago and are renovating. They're going to move their headquarters there. So kind of like the Files, that speaks a lot to an investment they want to make and a commitment they want to make to that part. And then right next door, basically, there's a vacant lot, but a young developer who's New Orleans born and bred has bought that. He tore the building that was there down. It was the Saruk Rugs. And he's getting ready to put a 4-story apartment condo / development there. 1500 block, there's a vacant lot, but it's under contract. So if that deal goes through, that's going to be another development. And then in the 1600 block, the former St. Charles Athletic Club is under renovation, and the new owner has a tenant going upstairs, a medical office. Downstairs, they're looking to lease that to a retail user or something like that. You have a couple of new restaurants going in. You have this wonderful Peruvian Tito's Pisco and Ceviche, or Ceviche and Pisco, that went in an old place. They're doing great. And then there's this super high-end steakhouse that's going in the old melting pot. They sell gold-dusted steaks that sell for a couple of $100. Yes. So I don't know how that's going to fly in New Orleans, but hey,
we'll find
Errol's
out.
gonna take us out.
We're gonna,
Just to give
they're
people
going to pay for it.
a
You know?
geographic reference, you're talking about St. Charles more along toward the circle.
So basically from the interstate, which is right by the old Jerusalem temple, which by the way is going to be a new church, all the way up to about Jackson. So that spot, super, super lower Garden District. I think propelling some of this is some of the redevelopment that you've seen, like from the Browns Dairy site, which is now going to be short-term rental properties and rental houses.
And meanwhile, Promenade Fabric's still there?
Promenade Fabrics is still there.
Still there, yeah.
Still there,
Great fabric
yes.
shop.
Wonderful.
Been there for a while. All right, thanks a lot, Steph. Okay, E, over to you. Politics.
Well, the legislature wound down. We saw the beginnings of a television war, particularly between Jeff Landry and
Wagstaff.
Steve Wagesback. They're both going after each other. The Landry, the anti-Landry thing is saying here he is, the Attorney General, is not doing enough about crime. Wagesback, they're trying to blame him that he worked for Bobby Jindal and those problems. And of course, none of the candidates admit to being the ones behind these, even though they have some pack group. But it is obvious there is. And what it says is, I think that the Landry people see Wagesback as the guy that maybe they got to keep an eye on Landry is leading in terms of being the Republican frontrunner. But Waguespack, he's not well known, but he has the credentials where I see him as the kind of guy who's going to get a lot of media support, a lot of good government kind of support. So I think they're trying to dirty him up kind of early as the campaign goes on. The other thing, the legislature had ended at 6 o'clock last night. At 6:11, John Schroeder, who's the treasurer, sent out an email talking about, well, they did fine, but they didn't do enough about the budget, and we got to do that. And so he was ready to go. So
Yeah.
what did you think?
I saw Schroeder in the gallery right as it ended. So yeah, it's amazing that the timing of it is all. Waguespack, as you said, he's got a name recognition hurdle to clear, but I think he's potentially going to be the best funded candidate after Landry. And to your point, yeah, that's where I think the war is going to be waged. The other Republicans in the race are sort of like picking up the scraps, if you will. And meanwhile, I think if you are the Democratic candidate, Sean Wilson, you kind of sit back and let these guys beat up one another in the primary because he just needs to make the runoff.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I really think Waguespack's got his work cut out for him based on the big advantage that Landry has as of now.
It is likely it'll be a Republican and Democrat in the runoff, but it doesn't have to be.
True.
It could be two Republicans.
Right.
And so all the more reason to try to muddy each other up during this time.
Okay, qualifying in August. Away
Right,
we go.
right.
All right, E, other stories.
Okay, last week with the death of Ed Munez, in carnival organizations there's a tradition of secrecy, like who's the boss, who's the captain. It doesn't hold up so much with the newer organizations. And the Endymion group had its meeting this week, and they announced that Dan Kelly, who had been the acting captain, is now the captain of Endymion. And the president of Endymion is Pepe Bruno. Some of you might remember as a state
Absolutely.
legislator, former state representative. So he knows how to keep an eye on the budget. That's one thing. So anyway.
All righty, thanks.
Good to know.
Stephanie.
Following a bankruptcy that hadn't gotten a lot of attention around here, a Metairie-based company called Cox Operating, and they filed in May. It's getting very contentious, and more than $200 million owed to small unsecured creditors based in the Houma, Thibodaux, Galliano, Raceland area, and over to Lafayette, offshore supply and service companies that were left holding the bag. So we'll be reporting more on that this weekend.
Looking for that. Okay, Greg, over to you.
We've got an exit interview, if you will, with Chip Klein, chairman of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, who has, I guess, kind of thrown down the challenge to not just the folks who are running for governor, but the current administration about placing more emphasis and getting the word out about the need to sustain the funding behind coastal restoration.
And of course, the legislature did approve the new coastal master plan, the 2023 master plan, which we're going to have a special about in a couple of weeks. So be looking for that. Okay, over to you, Roby.
So we're going back to the coast. We're going to be looking at recycling oyster shells to build these living shorelines, and what restaurants are doing to kind of close the gap so that their staff knows exactly how important oysters are that are brought to the table.
Very important indeed. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.